So what I was going to call this talk, and the tentative title is going to be some ribcage bullshit. All right, because that's what we're going to talk about today. And the reason why we're going to talk about the ribcage today is one thing, and this is one of two things that drives me and drives the decisions I make and the things I learn. Outcome. What's your result? How can you impact someone's life in the most effective way possible to meet their goals? Now, there's certain outcome measures that I look at when I'm looking at someone, but no one really gives a shit if we improve shoulder internal rotation. Get it? Like, Pat, you do something on the table, you see a substantial change, all the bros are like, oh, damn, fam, that looks great. Your client's still like, bro, I want to get jacked. I don't give a shit about that. So it's not about what you want, it's about what they want. And so what I have to search for is how can I maximize their results with the minimal amount of work possible, minimal effective dose. And when I was in PT school, the outcomes were pretty much body part specific. So if someone has lateral epicondylitis, we're going to do particular diagnostic interventions to say, okay, yep, it hurts when I do this, hurts when I stretch, probably lateral epicondylitis. We're going to do these things to treat that specific area, alleviate pain. Well, the problem is when you get to the clinic, the person you're treating has lateral epicondylitis, but they also have knee pain. They're also anxious, and their wife just left them. Like, that's a complex problem that requires multiple holistic and systemic solutions. And so it requires upon us to dive into a lot of areas to get this for our people. Think about all the things that you guys have learned over the last week. How many of us are going to have the physiology and training knowledge that Pat has, the neurology knowledge that Mike T has, the hypertrophy knowledge that Ryan has, the functional medicine knowledge that Ben has? I go on. How many of us can get that? But Eric's, well, let's not even use him as an example. How many of us need all the shit that he talked about too, right? But our clients need that. That's a big problem for us to have. And me personally, guys, I'm kind of stupid. Like, I'm never going to know that stuff as well as Pat does or as Eric does. So the other key that's going to drive this for me is simple, or simplicity. How can I make what I do as simple for me to understand as possible? And that's part of the reason why I do all these course notes and review all this stuff, is because it helps me understand how I can help my clients reach their goals. But more importantly, I can only help so many people. Because I only work with people one-on-one for 45 minutes, in person, one-on-one for an hour, offline or online. But you know what? If I can teach you guys how to do things better in the simplest way possible, to maybe where you don't understand this thing to the extent that I do, but you can still get your client results, well then, I've helped more people. We've all win. Because guys, it's this simple. Like, look at this goddamn thing. How many joints are here? How many bones? How many different tattoos this guy got? Like, this stuff's not easy. And the stuff that I'm going to talk to you guys about today came from trying to make this, which we all work with, easier to work with and simpler. And that's why from PT school, going from just trying to figure out lateral epicondylitis, I have to look at work or impacting all of this. Because if I have someone who hurts multiple areas, or if I'm a trainer and I'm excellent at coaching the squat, but for some reason they still can't achieve depth, I need to know how to impact this thing systemically to help reach one of those goals, or whatever the client's goal is. And so that kind of led me down the FMS, SFMA path, that led me down the PRI path, that led me down to taking way more Con Ed courses than I probably should have. And they're all right to an extent, but they're also all wrong to an extent. Because the problem that I kept running into was the big driving force for our movement capabilities has to do with this, the spine. Because this thing really is just one piece. If I increase lordosis at the cervical spine, which is normal, I have to get a corresponding increase in lordosis at the lumbar spine. If I increase kyphosis in the thoracic spine, I get an increased kyphosis at the sacrum. And the way we were trying to measure this was through these things, scapula, and these things, shoulders. And then when we get downstairs to, the good spots and stuff, these things. Well, the problem, guys, is I'm trying to use proxy measures here and here to try to do things here. But these guys, have their own problems. What if I have a labral tear? Is that going to be an accurate way to measure what's going on here? No, because there's laxity now at the shoulder. What if I have someone who has congenital hip dysplasia on that right hip? Can we use that as an accurate measure to tell us what's going on here? No. Or how about this? What if I have someone who does something wild and crazy at their lumbar spine? Maybe they have a spondylolisthesis, and that alters the mechanics of this one thing. What's that going to do to my proxy measures down there? It's really tough. So what I've tried to do with some of the measures, and this is nothing that I made, like when we're going to talk about infrasternal angle, this is straight up Shirley Starman, guys. So this stuff ain't new. It's been around for a hot minute. But the reason why I'm going more towards this and trying to find ways to measure this is because there's fewer ways we can compensate there. There's so many more degrees of freedom at the glenohumeral joint than there is here. And so if we can find ways to at least accurately measure this, then we can be more accurate at providing a minimal effective dose for our clients to reach their movement goals, have them do less work, and get us on to more important shit. Whether that's hypertrophy, whether that's fat loss, whether that's reducing anxiety, whatever. I want to get through this as quickly as humanly possible so we can get to the more important stuff. And so the best way that I can impact this is through respiration, in my opinion. And the reason why is because when we breathe in and breathe out, this whole thing has to move. I want you guys to stop breaking this down into thorax, abdominal region, and pelvic region. And let's just call it one thing, thoraco-abdominal pelvic cavity. Because this thing moves as one piece every time we take a breath of air in and a breath of air out. So the first thing we have to understand is, what does normal look like? Thing we won't see. So the way this thing works is as the diaphragm descends, there's certain things that have to happen certain things that happen at the ribcage in order to maximize gas exchange. Because that's really what breathing is about, maximizing gas exchange. So as this descends, what happens? I'll try to draw this out, but I'm going to apologize in advance. I suck at drawing. From a global perspective, if this is the thoraco-abdominal pelvic cavity, when I breathe in, this gets bigger. I get an increase in pressure in all directions, so the lungs can maximally fill, the tissues can get the gases that they need, life's good. And as I blow out, ideally this gets back to this size, so then we can exchange and get fresh air. Breaking it down to what this is, under normal circumstances, as the diaphragm descends, let's do a side view. So let's see, we got cervical spine, thoracic spine, lumbar spine, sacrum. Okay. Then we got sternum right here. As the diaphragm descends, these guys right here are going to spread apart. So I get the bucket handle action at the rib cage. Most prominent in the lower portion, but there is a bucket handle effect at the upper portion of the rib cage. So this is going to expand out. That's the side view. Diaphragm descends. What also happens laterally is I get the crap in here, the guts also pushing out. This is how we develop intra-abdominal pressure. Because to maximize gas exchange, I have to have the pressure down here equal to the pressure up here. So we get this dropping, lateral rib cage goes out, guts go out to the side, life is good. From the side view. And this is where this is going to come in. Ideally, I want the pump handle action of the sternum to come up this way. So it's an anterior and superior rise of the sternum. This also creates the pump handle action of the ribs to go forward and up. So what happens is air, which will be blue, is going to go this way. Okay? Diaphragm descends, so we're going to get air filling that way. What else happens is the posterior thorax, right here, has to expand out. So I can feel the posterior aspect of the lungs. So I get airflow also going this way. All right. Y'all doing okay so far? What else has to happen, guys? Well, I'm getting good pressure here, here, and here, but also this first rib has to come up. We're talking about first rib elevation, first rib depression, getting too much scalenes or SCM. Scalenes are a primary muscle of inspiration. Like, this is not a bad thing. It's when this guy goes rampant that we run into problems. So this has to come up so I get pressure increasing up here. Right? That's normal, and that's the thorax. If we move downstairs to the abdomen, well, we already said, guys, we should get some lateral expansion of the guts into the abdomen. But we also want anterior and posterior displacement of the guts to maximize pressure there. So here we're also getting a relative kyphosis of the thorax and lumbar spine because everything is pushing back. Getting guts going this way. And then last but not least, what's the first rib of down here? Pelvic floor. This has to descend so I can get the goods pressing down there to maintain pressure. It is this mechanism that allows me to get effective gas exchange. Questions so far? And are we all kind of sort of on the same page? Right? This is normal. Now remember, guys, this to this, the whole spine kind of goes into a relative kyphosis because that helps create that back circle. If I get a relative kyphosis or counternutation of the sacrum, then the hemipelvi have to dip forward. Flexion, abduction, and external rotation. Okay? So this, and I can't move this, but this has to come forward so the sacrum has to come back. Yes, sir?
This is all still inhalation, correct?
This is inhalation, yep. And this is normal mechanics. Yep. And so another measure that we kind of look at, we can't measure this directly unless you want to get sued. This angle right here, the infrapubic angle, as I breathe in, yeah, except Pat, people pay Pat good money for that. Oh, I will. And abuse. So as this goes forward, this angle has to close. Because as this closes, that allows the pelvic floor to descend. The goods get pushed down there. We maintain good pressure in the pelvic region. All right? So an interesting relationship. Under normal conditions, this angle closes. This angle, remember, because there's bucket handle action of the rib cage, opens. So they are opposites. Yes. So as I take a breath of air in, under normal conditions, the infrapubic angle, which is, you can't see it, but basically this angle here closes. That allows the pelvic floor to descend to take the genitals, among other things.
Is that angle like our butthole?
Is that your butthole?
Yeah, the angle you're talking about.
It'd be right here. Like, so mons pubis, you know, the bony part when, you know, you're having fun. So that's the front portion of it. If you dive lower to that, really hard to palpate, that would be that angle. Butthole would be other side of that.
What are the two points of the angle?
Hang on, Mike first. Go ahead.
What's happening from a pelvic inlet and outlet perspective when that happens? When the pubic angle gets closes?
Outlet closes, inlet opens. Yep. So the angle would be pubic symphysis is your top point, and then the pubic rami, the inferior pubic rami would be the bottom portion of the angle.
Posterior.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Correct.
How are we doing so far, team? All getting this? Cool. And then the infrasternal angle, that's the lateral expansion of the rib cage. And this is important because I think a lot of people who I work with, and even myself included, have messed this up. What that angle is is, so we got our sternum right here, right? You guys can feel this on yourself. Yeah. Sternum's hard. We want to use the xiphoid process as our pubic symphysis. Like this is the same thing. I measure from here, and then it's the angle of these false ribs here that I'm measuring. So it's this. If you're doing this, you're not getting an accurate measure because everyone's going to seem wide. And you're like, man, I haven't seen a narrow person in a day. I guarantee you, I don't think any of us are narrow here because you have to measure from where that angle actually occurs.
Wide.
Narrow. Everyone's. I would bet money that everyone is narrow here. All right.
Yeah, that was just a question. I mean, because I would assume everyone here is going to have that PVC pelvis. You know what I mean? And wouldn't that be associated with a wide angle?
We'll get to it. Yeah. Yes. Kind of. And the reason why we're looking at this is because this area of the spine and the rib cage has a little bit more compensatory activity than, say, up here. Because this T1 to T7, because we share a common attachment at the sternum, moves as a cohesive unit. So it's hard for these ribs to move independently. This area has a much better chance of moving independently. All right? How are we doing so far? Does everyone kind of understand what happens when I take a breath in under normal circumstances? Now, how many of us work with normal people? Yeah.
What's normal? General.
Yeah. People who you think have this, because what I would say is if you can do this, you probably move pretty well at all joints. You have about a 90-degree external angle, which is what we're using as a norm. I would assume probably no one. So we have to look at what happens for whatever reason, alterations in pressure, I don't know. It's something that we do to manage existence. What happens when this respiratory mechanism goes awry? The reason why I like this is because there's fewer compensatory strategies we have at our disposal to make this happen. So, as the diaphragm descends, guys, what happens to the lateral ribs? They go out. Okay? Well, let's say that I descend the diaphragm, and for whatever reason, and the set point of the diaphragm, I believe, can change within 4 to 6 weeks, so use that as your litmus test. I'd have to get the reference on it. But as the diaphragm descends, what if I never get the chance to fully ascend? This right here is going to appear much wider than norm, right? And we're using norm for the infrasternal angle as 90 degrees. That's just what they've come up with in terms of Shirley. I don't have a best guess, but I could tell you that it'll probably make a little bit more sense as I dive into this, why we're using that as our number, okay? So as the diaphragm descends, the infrasternal angle is going to be wide. And what that means is that these angles are going to be much greater than 45 degrees on both sides. So much greater than 90. I use like 100, 110 probably as a number, okay? Now what this is going to do is it's going to change the mechanics that happen at the spine and what happened up here. Let's look spine first. In the spine, as the diaphragm descends, what happens is those nice curves that we had, so we had cervical lordosis, thoracic kyphosis, lumbar lordosis, sacral nutation, or sacral kyphosis, I should say. All of these curves become exaggerated. Because what happens is, because of some alteration in pressure, instead of this and this being opposite as I breathe in, these two things now match. So my infrasternal angle is now the same as my infrapubic angle. So if this is wider than norm, this has to be wider than norm. All right? So if I have a wider infrapubic angle, that's posterior rotation of the innominate. What that's going to create is a relative nutation at the sacrum. So instead of I'm breathing in and this is happening, I'm breathing in and this is happening. Okay? Now remember, guys, the spinal curves, assuming that there is no crazy hinging or crazy mechanics, these guys move as one piece. So if I have an increase in nutation of the sacrum, I have to have an increase in lordosis. I have to have an increase in kyphosis, and I have to have an increase in lordosis. Right? They all move as one piece. So if you're wide, the curves exaggerate. That's going to do some funky things to the rib cage. Now, when I take a breath of air in, what happens to the posterior thorax? It should expand. So, well, what happens if I have an increase in kyphosis? Do you think it's already expanded, right? So I do really well if I'm wide getting air back here. Okay? If I do well getting air back here, scaps have to come a little bit more forward. Right? That's normal. This is a normal compensatory strategy that we have. If I do super good at getting air back here, to manage pressure, effectively what's going to happen is I'm actually going to lose my capability of expanding air in the front. I've overdone this, so I can't do this. So what happens is this guy is now a down pump handle. All right? Now what makes this kind of complicated is you can't just look at someone and say, oh yeah, clearly a down pump handle, because sometimes you'll see people with a wide infrasternal angle that looks like that you can clearly see the sternum. I'm sure you all have seen this if you're looking at this stuff. Well, watch this, guys. I got a pump handle down right now, right? Because I took a nice exhale. How am I looking now?
Sexy.
All right? Yeah. Right? So here, it looks like the pump handle's up, but in reality, due to respiratory position, it's not. There was something that I did at the spine to compensate with that. How are we doing so far with this? Okay, this is just from a wide. Now, to your point, Pat, because you mentioned that if I have someone who's a PEC patient, if we're talking about PRI, where we're taught that the pelvis is tipped forward, in this case, because the sacrum is nutated, the pelvis ought to be posteriorly rotated, right? Well, what happens if I keep driving sacral nutation? Or I keep exaggerating this curve? What do you think happens? Because how many degrees of freedom are there within the SI joint? Not much. So what can happen is I might have this be my relative motion that happens, but if I continue to increase lordosis, it looks like the pelvis is facing forward. Can you see that? Another reason why this is hard to trust. Yes?
So you have a posteriorly rotated pelvis locally or orthotic or extended lumbar spine.
Or just an exaggerated curvature of the spine. Yeah.
Okay.
Which again is why I continue to come back to this, because based on normal mechanics, if I'm posteriorly rotated at the hips, I should be able to clear hip adduction because the femur does not get dinged on the superior aspect of the acetabulum. Because if this comes forward, if this is forward and I go to do this, well, I hit on the top portion. So if I can rotate this back, see if I can do this. If this comes forward and I try to adduct the femur, I hit the top portion. I can't do it. Also, if you look at the study and anatomic investigation of the Ober's test, if things tighten up back here, which happens with an anterior rotation of the innominate, I can't get full excursion of that hip adduction movement. So if I'm posteriorly rotated, that should allow the femur to clear this upper portion of the acetabulum and I can adduct. We're doing okay with that? But what would happen is the flip side where I wouldn't be able to abduct because as this opens right here, the thing that opens up the infrapubic angle is your abductors because they attach on the outside of the pelvis, right? So then if these guys are on, I can't do that. But then things change where if this is wide, and then because of curve exaggeration of the spine, this whole thing comes forward. So I have a case where the infrapubic angle is now wide, but because everything is dipped forward, the positions that these bones are at are changed. Does that make sense?
because, I mean, I might need to have a conversation after this. Like, these are always these things that, like,
Yeah.
first time hearing it, it's like, I think I'm picking up the essence,
Yeah.
but maybe not some of the details.
Yeah, and that's the thing though. That's why like I'm still using this stuff, but it gets complicated. I would hope you guys are somewhat confused right now. And that's why I'm still using this as my primary decision making, because there's no confusion here. It's like there's no way that I can have someone who's wide appear narrow. Like it's, due to the constraints within here, it's just not possible.